Hello, everybody. My name is Benjamin Day.
And I am Jillian Mason.
And this is Medicare for All, the conference for everybody who needs healthcare. You see what I did there? Switching it up. That's because it is the most wonderful time of the year. Maybe not for everyone. Okay, maybe not even for most people. But for activists in the movement to make Medicare for All a reality, this is the week we gather to plot and to scheme and to kvetch. So welcome to the 2024 Medicare for All Strategy Conference, which we're calling Healthcare Beyond the Ballot Box, organized, of course, by your friends at Healthcare Now. And for those of you who are attending the conference right now, you are getting a sneak preview of our very special conference episode. So, since our theme this year is about, since our theme this year is about what happens to Medicare for All in an election year and right beyond the election year, we wanted to invite some of our favorite policy people with their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in DC. Is the pulse still beating? Is it dead yet? We're going to find out. So they're going to help us sort out what's happening with healthcare on Capitol Hill and what role we can play to get some justice out of DC in the coming year. I would love that. Jillian, would you like to introduce our guests?
I certainly would. We have the lovely Egan Kemp, a public citizen. Egan is the healthcare policy advocate for Public Citizens Congress Watch Division. He's an expert in healthcare policy and served as a senior analyst, God, that sounds fancy, at the U.S. Government Accountability Office prior to coming to Public Citizen. Wait, so we have you to blame for the lack of accountability in the government. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
welcome, Egan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then we also have the fabulous Alex Lawson of Social Security Works. Alex is the executive director of Social Security Works, which is the convening member of the Strengthened Social Security Coalition, a coalition made up of over 340 national and state organizations representing over 50 million Americans. Thank you so much for being here, Alex.
I love plotting and scheming, so let's get to it.
Let's do it. All right. So, and kvetching, right? Let me start with the kvetching, actually. Like, as you know, I suffer from major depression and some anxiety issues as well. But I think that even if I were like 100% sane, I'd be a little bit depressed here, right? So we've got this election cycle, right? We've got one of our major candidates for president being a guy who's solidly against Medicare for all, and then the other one being Trump, right? Is 2024 a bad federal election cycle, or is it the worst federal election cycle of our lifetime, and why?
Is that for the whole panel?
That's for everyone. Yeah.
I mean, I honestly say, no. It's super grim, but I've been through a few of these. They're all sort of grim. And in terms of if we're just looking at Medicare for all, we're closer with a Biden presidency than we've ever been with any other Democratic presidency ever. That's not depressing to me. He's definitely not Medicare for all. Joe Biden is, he ran on the I'm not Medicare for all, but virtually on all other domestic economic policy issues, Bidenomics is based on Sanders-esque populism, not Obama-esque neoliberalism. And, the reforms that we've actually seen them take against corporations, they still need to do a ton more on the things that they have. But there's been a bit of a blank spot on insurance. And so I do think in a second Biden administration, taking on the corporate greed and sociopathy in health insurance is definitely on the agenda. So I don't know, that to me, it's it seemed nicer before or something, or closer, but this is actually closer. And on the other hand, the stakes couldn't be more clear on what you get with Donald Trump. So that dude is not going to get us healthcare. He is actually going to do what he did the last time, which is put, the billionaires in charge of everything. They care really only about the taxes. The billionaires are full bore behind Donald Trump, as you know, any analysis would show, this is just late stage capitalism, right? The billionaires are pushing full fascism because at the point where they've hoovered up all of the money, they have to just take over the entire state, or the people are like, hey, why don't we just raise those guys' taxes and give everyone health care? And the billionaires are like, no. So, is it scary that like a bunch of millions of Americans are like, I don't care about democracy. I'm going to go with this dude who's a buffoon and a crook, as long as he continues to hate the same people that I hate. Yeah, but I also look at history. And so like, it's not that surprising. But yeah, I don't think this is that, it's not depressing to me. It's more I hope what's actually, and maybe this will piss people off even more, but what's depressing to me is actually the left's sort of analysis or lack of analysis in many places on this, that like lack of strategic thinking, and being like divorced from the fact that, it's a movement and we just keep on building and building and building and sitting out because things are sad or anything that only helps the billionaires, who will definitely throw you up against the wall and kill you for profit. That's like what we're up against. So I don't know if that depresses you, but that's been the same for a while.
Your response is really an emotional roller coaster. So, I mean,
I think Alex and I are going to continue our good cop, bad cop routine that we have at these conferences. Yeah, I mean, my take is slightly brighter than Alex on healthcare. I mean, yes, the state of the world is very depressing, and the fact that Trump is even in the running is very depressing. But I think we've seen a sort of at least a movement, if not a total sea change on Medicare in recent years. I mean, the Republicans got really scared as soon as there was discussion about cuts to Medicare. And instantly you even heard diehard people who would give nothing, who would throw anyone under the bus in order to get Medicare cuts, saying, no, we can't talk about this until after the election. So it's not that they're not going to try to do that, but they understand just how much it really is the third rail of American politics. And at the same time, you see Biden all of a sudden engaging more with the Medicare for All movement, the folks fighting for changes and improvements to traditional Medicare and to hold Medicare Advantage accountable in a way that we didn't see sort of in among prior administrations. And so they understand the importance of protecting Medicare. They understand the importance of being seen out there doing things to hold insurance companies accountable. And we see insurance companies running scared. I mean, they're making changes to the way that they do business. You even have some companies saying, oh, we're really going to take a hard look at how we, deny care to people because we think there's some mistakes that have been made. It's like, obviously they don't believe any of that stuff, but the fact that they're feeling the pressure in a way that they never have before is good for us, and it shows the power of our movement. And it also shows that the having two elderly gentlemen running, and everyone in the country, or not everyone, a lot of people in the country very angry that this is where we are and want younger politicians heading tickets and getting attention, is going to push the Democratic Party in a much better direction. And the younger Democrats are much more exciting than the older Democrats, and much more likely to be on Medicare for All and other progressive policies. And so in that sense, I'm more optimistic than I would have thought. But yes, depression is real. And definitely this is a time for girding your loins.
Oh boy.
It didn't dawn on me until you just said it, Egan. But both candidates have been on Medicare for decades now.
Alex said it's a time for solidarity, and that is so true, right? We were never going to be done in November, right? So we just have to keep moving and stick together. Yeah, awesome. I love that. I like that message.
Yeah. So to back things up a little bit, I'm curious what both of you think about just kind of the run up to this election. I mean, have there been any what you feel like are kind of progress or breakthroughs in the Medicare for All movement or the broader health justice movement kind of in the past year that have led us to some of those silver linings that Egan was talking about? Alex, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. so we sort of have to pick. But what happened is Joe Biden was elected as the not Medicare for all guy, right? And then, then, you know, the work around passing basically his vision really quickly, you could see there's a lot we can do here, because fighting for Medicare for all is also an understanding that, you know, we're up against three of the most well-resourced and sociopathic industries that you can get, you know, big hospital, big insurance, big pharma. They will literally kill you for profit. And so we're not going to beat them in one, and no politician is going to get us to the promised land, because politicians are lagging indicators. So what I saw and continue to see is that the movement has changed the entire landscape. And, you know, like we tried to get adding vision, hearing, and dental into Medicare, which is a critical component of improving Medicare before we expand it to everybody. That was in Build Back Better. Then Joe Manchin, you know, is like, nah, I'm not going to do that. Even though West Virginia has the highest percentage of seniors with zero natural teeth, right? And he didn't have a reason. He just was like, no, you can't have nice things.
No teeth for you.
No teeth for you. But, you know, we didn't lose everything because we started so high. And I think Senator Sanders had a huge role in, you know, setting the bar so high that as DC made things worse, we still ended up with Medicare negotiating drug prices, which again is a huge component of improving Medicare before we expand it to everybody.
And for those who haven't, you should totally go back and listen to our previous episode with Alex about prescription drug negotiations, which was super fun, and you will enjoy it to get more of the details. But continue, Alex. Sorry.
And probably some swearing, because that's usually my MO, hating pharma and swearing about it. But so I do think that there wasn't much in Build Back Better IRA about insurance. And that's, I actually agreed with Egan's take. But I do think that of the like taking on corporate consolidated power, insurance was the one that was not really teed up in the what became the Inflation Reduction Act, that had massive improvements to Medicare that are necessary, but insurance wasn't there. But coming out of that, a lot of the movement actually, I think, really strategically. So I love the movement, even though I was a little talking, being mean earlier. I do think there was this really amazing and nimble strategic move to focus in on, okay, so Joe Biden's not going to be the Medicare for all guy. Well, what about the taking on the insurers and restraining their greed and, you know, the fact that they delay and deny care, they kill people for profit. That's their business model. So that turned into this, you know, this amazing work that's been done against so-called Medicare Advantage, the privatization of Medicare. That not only gathered a lot of the muscle of the Medicare for All movement, but expanded beyond that and brought in some other, you know, actors and players, the seniors community. And that solidarity has moved the ball. This is what Egan alluded to a lot. Again, sort of the MO, it's like a lot has been done. It's actually more than has ever been done before, ever, to restrain Medicare Advantage or the privatization of Medicare. And still an enormous amount is left undone. And so that work, I actually am very hopeful. You know, the Senate's going to be the hardest electorally of the three. So it's going to be difficult to have a governing or legislating trifecta. But there's a lot that can be done administratively against the insurance companies. So I actually think that strategic maneuver of not just stopping because Joe Biden is not going to, you know, sign Medicare for all, but we can refocus him and be like, okay, well then let's just actually expand traditional Medicare and stop and reverse the privatization of Medicare. And all of that is necessary, work to be done to get to Medicare for all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a couple other sort of brief bright spots. One is on, so this will be surprising to hear a bright spot, but private equity in healthcare. Sort of around the beginning of the Biden administration, we were seeing the peak of private equity in healthcare in sort of really terrifying ways. Them coming in, buying up hospitals, buying up doctors' practices, selling the infrastructure out from under them. So selling their buildings, selling their ability to do their work, and then charging them money, and then sort of getting out and them going bankrupt. Folks in Massachusetts will know this from the Stewart case, which is still all over the news. But we are seeing a private equity pull back from healthcare. One, because they've already ravaged a lot of parts of healthcare, but two, there's increased pressure on them. There's the DOJ, FTC, HHS are now all really investigating them in ways that they haven't before. And so it's a bright spot because I think a lot of people were bringing pressure on and raising concerns, whether it was doctors, whether it was patients, even some whistleblowers in private equity community, and then I think the other area is really around, as Alex was saying, in Medicare disadvantage, Medicare privatization, and the Trump administration had tried an experiment where they were going to throw seniors seniors on traditional Medicare into private relationships with doctors, and thinking that it would be in their best interest. But unsurprisingly, seniors did not want to be experimented upon with a new unfounded system, and they fought back. And we, as a movement, fought back. The Medicare for All movement really kicked into gear. Folks like Physicians for a National Health Program and others really jumped in and joined that fight full bore, and were able to really push back on it and get once it was the Biden administration, to really curtail some of the scarier things that they were planning on doing with what was called the direct contracting entities. And so we are seeing some important wins. We are seeing some important changes to the healthcare landscape that I think bode well for us to continuing to push for actual improvements.
So let me just say one other two words, which is Lena Khan is actually in and of herself a huge bright spot. So the FTC, which has been mute for decades, is actually challenging and winning against consolidated corporate power at a level that is, since the trust busting era, we haven't seen it. And the FTC are really teeing up United Health, which is a massive monopoly. So they should. But that's what's got industry scared, the movement and, wonderful grassroots activists just took the lobby of United Health, and it drives this focus on their bad acts. The media are starting to see this as something that they need to cover over and over again and then again. FTC, United Health has to be looking at the wins that the FTC has, notched against tech and others, and they know that their business model is entirely illegal based on consolidated power.
Yeah, and just to highlight what you guys have been saying, I feel like at least the mainstream Democratic model of health reform for the last couple of decades that kind of led to the Affordable Care Act, and since then, has been, let's bring the healthcare industry to the table with us, and we'll agree to spend more money, but we're not going to, cut off any of their income streams, right? We're not going to really take on any of the healthcare industry, any of the big branches, pharma, insurance, hospitals, providers, no one. And that's basically what the Affordable Care Act is. Let's try to do some good things by spending more money, but the healthcare industry gets to sit at the table crafting it and gets to take a cut out of the influx of new money, right? So what you guys are highlighting just in the last year or two is really a bit of a shift in that Democratic strategy, which is actual willingness to take on pharma and to cut off some income streams from pharma, willingness to take on private equity and to cut off some of their income streams. I think that is a kind of a significant new shift. It's not nearly as far as it needs to be to do do something like Medicare for all, but there's cracks in the armor that I see, like you guys are saying.
Yeah, and it sounds even more so like you guys are saying that, we know whenever there's some kind of policy movement, right, there's a movement behind it, right? And so it sounds like a lot of these kind of bright spots over the course of the year have really been engineered by activists and organizers around the country who are kind of willing to take more of those aggressive steps. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of exciting movement. One of the areas that we work closely on at Public Citizen is the Medicare for All resolutions, and we're seeing a lot more sort of excitement in southern states than we have before. Places like Georgia, Florida, even Mississippi. We've seen Louisiana. Folks getting excited in ways around Medicare for All that we haven't seen. Getting activated. Becoming aware of sort of, just how much, their town, their county spends on healthcare and sort of what Medicare for all would mean. And so it isn't a bright spot for me in seeing, different folks come online. And I think in some of those states and counties, really pressuring their local representatives and also getting engaged in the election and really seeing Medicare for all as sort of the foundation for their activism, but then using that as sort of a jumping point to really push for the broader progressive policies they believe
in. And I just, so that is mirrored with, me, Diane Archer, and Wendell Potter used to just walk around the halls of Congress every single year being like, MedPAC is going to say that private insurers are ripping off the people to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. That's what the next report is going to say. The IG, the Inspector General, is going to say that insurers in so-called Medicare Advantage are killing people and there's no oversight. That's what the next report is going to say. And it was very lonely. There was literally the three of us walking around and offices who are our friends, offices who are on Medicare for all, right? Who signed on to Medicare for all, but they'd be like, I have to sign this industry letter, for example, or they weren't gonna take on the insurers privatizing Medicare because their constituents, so many of their constituents who don't know that, like Medicare and Medicare Advantage to the vast majority of people, it's Medicare. That was the greatest trick that the industry ever pulled, was getting the branding appended to their corporate product. And that confusion led to, and the general wimpiness of politicians. But that's changed. That's completely changed. And I will say the strategic thinking of the Medicare for All movement to really rush into that space. And I will also say that Adi Barkan and Be a Hero playing a lead role in helping make that shift. That the path to Medicare for all through a White House that does not support Medicare for all is to neutralize as best we can our opponents and to actually take the pieces that we know are needed, adding vision, hearing, dental, prescription drug negotiation, all of the improvements to Medicare, and trying to get those done. So it's a totally different space, and industry is definitely losing in terms of Medicare Advantage. They've lost, I'll say. I'm going to just state it. They don't have the armor anymore. They're not seen as invincible, and how they operate is better and better understood. You still have, and I know there's a huge swath of like smarty pants DC. So the wonks and the people who are like producing the papers, and a lot of staff on the Hill who it is still, they're even more lagging indicators. It's like written in their bones that, oh, well, traditional Medicare is very inefficient, and we have to add efficiency through the private. That's still there, but man, they don't command the room anymore. And you can actually be like, well, what about this cavalcade of studies that shows that they're less efficient? They rip us off and they kill people. that is a big shift intellectually that we see happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add one brief thing. I mean, the space that we're in is so different. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago where we were talking about, you know, raising the Medicare age to 67, and now, you know, even Biden has talked about, you know, lowering the Medicare age, and so they feel that pressure. I mean, I think one of the other good examples was the Sanders and Biden having commitments around the first time Biden was elected, because there was a movement that was concerned that Biden was going to go too far to the center on healthcare, and so they really pushed him, and his administration continues to feel it, and we continue to push them on a number of things, and they've made progress in ways that has surprised me in good ways.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you guys about November 6th, the day after the election. I mean, we know we're going to have a fight on our hands, I think, one way or the other, regardless of how the elections turn out. But could you kind of game out the possibilities for us a little bit, like worst case election scenario, best case election scenario, or the dreaded in-between scenario? Alex, why don't you start off? How do you think about Medicare for All in the context of like post-election?
What's the dreaded in-between scenario here? Did they both win, or?
Well, I was thinking more of divided Congress, you know, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Jillian went right to Civil War.
Right.
Where my head's at.
That's the best case scenario. Right.
But that is, I mean, that's what I started in the sort of with the depressing question, is like, it's very real. The worst case scenario, actually, I don't know which path leads to it, but it's violence. It's political violence. Right-wing, billionaire-funded political violence, like was seen on January 7th, but maybe successful. And so, like, the question of what does the Medicare for All movement do against right-wing fascist, power? And again, the answer is solidarity. It has to be solidarity, and standing against, understanding that right-wing fascism is never going to deliver on health justice, right? Like, no matter what. But some people,
hot take alert. Hot take alert.
But some people are still fooled by Trump's faux populism, right?
That's
They're
right.
like,
You're right.
actually, Trump was the one who took on pharma. And you're like, no, he didn't. He put the pharma cartel guy in charge of healthcare. But I do think, I think Trump's doing less of that this time. He's more mask off. Like, it's all about the tax cuts and extending the tax cuts for the billionaires, right? Which, if you listen to the billionaires, that's the only thing they care about. That's why they're willing to foment right-wing violence and overthrow democracy so that they don't have to pay more in taxes. That's as simple as it gets. So that's the worst case scenario. I think there are scenarios where Biden gets a second trifecta, meaning the Democrats take the House, which I think is actually the lightest lift of all of them, because the Republicans are just ridiculous, and everyone can see that, right? Like, they can't even sell the narrative that they're not a bunch of schmoes who can't do anything, because they are.
Yeah, when you need the Democrats to save your speaker, that's not great. That's not great for Republicans.
Yeah,
over and over, right? But then the Senate is harder, but you can see it. It doesn't take a ton of squinting. And then Biden taking the White House. And in that case, there's another shot for, so what do I think then? It's something as big or bigger than Build Back Better, right? Like something that, and without Manchin, without cinema. So the dude who stopped those is not there anymore. Hopefully that would lead to people thinking about filibuster reform. And if we can get that done, then really Medicare for All again, maybe Joe Biden's not going to call it Medicare for All, but what if we shrunk private insurance in Medicare Advantage down to zero and lowered the right? There's all these steps along the way that would take us further. So the trifecta is very real. And then this is where the Republicans winning all three of them is a disaster. And the legislation that's going to come out and what they would push. It's basically tax handouts to billionaires. The divided ones are the ones which are sort of most interesting. And divided Congress, I actually am quite hopeful because we've done the work. Again, the movement has done the work. There's a lot of executive actions that can be taken that move us. And in a divided Congress, that's the only stuff that's going to happen. So those are the scenarios I see. It literally ranges from political violence at scale. And the thing that is gives me a lot of hope is that the American people did see what happened. And also, the stormtroopers of the right-wing fascist movement, many of them are in jail now because of the illegal actions and violence they perpetrated on January 7th. And so, again, I can keep spinning out all of the yarns, but I think the key is, again, just going to be solidarity. The march towards health justice requires us to defeat the billionaire class and their arms in big insurance, big hospital, and big pharma. And, we're going to stand in solidarity with the people who are moving in that direction. And I don't think that we should take out of the realm of possibility that if there is another Democratic trifecta, that we get right up to the edge of Medicare for all. That really we just have to let President Biden say, this is not Medicare for all, but it's right there on the edge of it, because healthcare is still a massive motivating issue for the electorate and for the elected Democrats as well.
It'll be the Medicare for everyone but Trump bill.
Exactly. It'll be like, what if we put Medikids in, right? So we cover all children, and then we lower the age to 55. And you're like, oh, well, that leaves out a bunch of people. And you're like, okay, we'll get to them next. But that would be a massive step forward. And again, what we're trying to do is create momentum that can't be stopped. And that's why they are rushing as fast as possible to kill Medicare.
Well, and I think one of the things that's important to think about is the right-wing billionaires. They're thinking one quarter at a time, and so it's like they need these tax cuts because they need the next few quarters to have those tax cuts so that they're, collecting those billions. And so we need to be thinking longer term. If Republicans win the trifecta and they catch the car again, they're going to do really bad and dumb things, and it's going to radicalize people in a similar way that it did last time. Yeah. I think the scary stuff is that Heritage and others have really bad ideas, and obviously Trump is just running to keep himself out of jail and to pardon himself, and so I think he's going to be amenable to doing what they want. But on the flip side, he's also terrified when people don't like him, and most of the Heritage stuff is stuff that if he's signing, people are going to be outraged. So if he's making cuts to Medicare, if he's deporting millions of people, there's going to be huge uprisings. And so if they catch that car, they're going to and do the dumb stuff that they're threatening to do. The American people are going to hopefully push back in ways that force them and radicalize them and lead to them sort of taking increasingly active steps in their own political educations. I think the other thing and this is more sort of, any Republican president, there is some, as Alex was mentioning, politicians are really a lagging indicator. And so some folks will be less nervous to sign on to something like Medicare for all, something progressive, if it's not, Biden who's against Medicare for all in the White House. So in previous, during the Trump administration, we were able to sign on a number of folks that were hesitant around Medicare for all because they felt like it wasn't going to move in that moment. And then we kept them on even during the Biden administration. some folks that even surprised us that would get on at the last minute as original co-sponsors, or would get on later on after it was introduced. And so there are opportunities there to push people, to get people engaged in the movement, even under a Republican administration. And I think, under sort of day one after, if it is the Democratic trifecta, I mean, we have a lot of people already planning what could fit through reconciliation. What would filibuster reform? What would be, important democracy improvements that would put the country on a better, firmer democratic standing, and all of those things are important for eventually getting Medicare for all. That a country with less money in politics, a country with fewer bad lobbyists on the Hill, all of a sudden is much easier to get Medicare for all. And so I think pushing the Biden administration, during and up to the election and immediately after, if they win, is going to be important.
I think that's all of this is so. Should I tell this story? Yeah, I'll tell this story. No matter how.
Go for it, Jillian.
All right. So, you guys are talking about all these really good opportunities that we might have, which I think is really awesome because, there are always opportunities, every problem is an opportunity dressed in work clothes, right? Anyway, but so we've got these kind of two different scenarios here where on one hand, there's Trump and that radicalizes people and we start to push back, right? On the other hand, there's Biden and then perhaps the trifecta, right? Where we have an opportunity to actually pass some smaller things. And Bernie Sanders did a talk at Harvard last month where he talked a little bit about this. And he said that, basically we're probably not going to pass Medicare for all in the next session. No shocker, right? Even Alex's most hopeful scenario, right? We don't pass quote unquote Medicare for all, right? And he said, but there are lots of other opportunities for things that we can do if Biden wins the election, if we actually have some Democrats in Congress, et cetera, et cetera. And he talked about things like you were talking about, Alex, actually reducing the age for Medicare, doing, taking care for kids, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of our supporters were a little bit glum about that, right? Because all they heard was Medicare for all is a bridge too far, right? But when I was hearing that, I was like, actually, this is a pretty hopeful picture. And this is about some things that we could do in the meantime, right? That we could actually use to improve people's lives, right? And get us closer to Medicare for all, right? Which are the two kind of things that I think we're looking for. Those are our criteria, right? Things that get us closer to our eventual goal and actually make people's lives better. So I actually had an opportunity to be on a little coalition huddle call with Bernie Sanders last week. And I asked him about that and he clarified and he said, yes, that's right. He said, you have to keep the vision of Medicare for all alive, right? It has to keep being the thing that we're working towards, but we also have to do everything that we can in between in order to, help some of the people who are suffering and in crisis right now. And I said, thank you so much, Senator Sanders. And then he said, that was the end of the question period. And he was like, maybe I'm being too depressed about this election cycle. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, come off mute and tell me that I'm wrong. I did not realize that I was already off mute. And I blurted out to myself, oh no, we're deeply fucked. At which point Bernie Sanders said, is that a technical term? But so all of this is just to say, right, that we have this, we need to defeat Trump. We need to defeat fascism, right? But if we have this scenario where we have Biden, we have some Democrats in Congress, we have these opportunities. Are there any other opportunities that you haven't mentioned yet that you see in the coming years that we could, think of working on in order, again, get us closer, improve people's lives?
So let me tell a slightly inappropriate anecdote for that. Just because
glad I opened the door.
Yeah, it's not inappropriate at all. It's hilarious, and you can email me and I'll tell you who. But a big thing to remember is that what we're fighting for is also correct, right? We actually have the truth on our side. The health insurers really will never give healthcare to people. They make their money by denying care. And that inherent contradiction is becoming more and more apparent to people. And Republicans generally represent more rural areas in this country. And rural areas are punched right in the face by industry, hardest and first, because they're the least profitable, right? There's more, they're older, and they require money, right? And they're for a host of reasons. So rural healthcare is actually, if you just Google like Republican rural healthcare, you're going to find a lot of Republicans talking about it. But what's hilarious is the inherent contradiction part, and the opportunity is, like, let's get some strange bedfellow stuff going on, but also maybe there'll be less resistance. They'll never champion things, but I watched a staffer go through the psychic turmoil as I was on this call, because she's like, the problem is, and she was getting all animated, and I was like, egging her on, being like, yeah, the rural health, and she's like, the problem is that as long as, and I was like, what? She's like, as long as profit is driving the decisions, it'll never deliver health. And I'm like, oh, bingo. But then she's like, but of course we could never actually like do anything to restrain corporate da-da-da-da-da. It was hilarious though to watch that, because we're correct. And so the industry side is all based on lies. It's a giant house of cards, and the truth is their house of cards is based on billions of dollars of advertising being like, we're doing a great job, but they're not. And ours is based on the fundamental truth that not only are they not doing a great job, that they never can do a good job. That the inherent contradiction of making decisions based on profit will guarantee that they never prioritize delivering healthcare. And so, unfortunately, as they ravage the country more and more, it's harder for them to sell the narrative that they're the good guy. And we're seeing what we've predicted for years. We're seeing it, right? We're seeing collapsing networks. We're seeing people think that they could go to their doctor only to find out that they can't. And we're seeing that more and more. So that's a big opportunity, is that it's harder for, even the people who are just taking the bag, just cash bag from industry, they're probably not going to be as vocal in defense of industry, because it's harder to defend them when you look at rural healthcare in this country and it's decimated, right? And so those are like opportunities because of the malfeasance, inability for the industry to not be terrible actors.
Yeah, and I think one reason that Sanders may be frustrated is he is now the chairman of the HELP committee, which is one of the most powerful committees on healthcare in the Senate, and he's putting out really good information. They're holding powerful hearings, but the DC echo chamber is more worried about his interactions with the ranking member and whatnot, as opposed to really reporting on what they're finding and sort of the terrible things that healthcare companies are doing. But some of that is really breaking through, and you are seeing, increased criticism of companies that are, closing rural hospitals or buying up entire, counties worth of doctors and taking them out of network. That there is real pressure. I think one of the bright spots, as Alex was saying, is that it is going to be tougher and tougher for these folks to get away with some of the worst things that they're doing. In part because some of the worst things that they're doing are meaning that people aren't getting health care in Republican districts, and they are saying, well, why is it so bad here? What's happening? And I think things like the Stewart debacle in Massachusetts are helping people understand that this is happening everywhere, and it's having a much bigger effect in some places where all of a sudden your hospital closes that was 45 minutes away from you. Well, now the closest one is 2.5 hours away. If you have a heart attack, you're just straight up dead. And if you're not dead, you probably had a helicopter ride, and now you're $40,000 in debt, and so now you're just feels, oh, well, I'm kind of alive, but now I have to sell my house. I have to, do all these other things. And all of that sort of bald-faced greed is really forcing people to think differently about healthcare, and the massive debt that Americans are taking on to get their healthcare, get the healthcare that they need is terrifying for folks. And it's one of the reasons that Sanders and Representative Khanna just introduced a bill to push back on medical debt and to help clear out medical debt for millions of Americans. And I think things like that, the lived experiences of Americans with healthcare, is going to continue to push this movement forward and radicalize people as they tell their stories and understand their stories are connected to millions of other stories that people are telling and experiencing.
Can I just add, just on the medical debt one, like if you want to see sea change, like look at that, because Bernie Sanders is the chair of HELP, one of the most powerful committees in the Senate. The other one's finance, and which is Senator Wyden. And generally, like canceling medical debt, just sort of like vibes wise, you would have said like, oh, well, that's not Wyden's bag. It's and we worked with Sanders and Khanna's office on it. We love the bill. We worked very closely with them, developing it, pushing it. It is a very innovative approach of canceling medical debt. But I remember, because I actually wrote the bill that canceled student debt, I remember how fast people's brains can move from like, oh, that'll never happen. And then everyone's like, oh, we're going to cancel a lot of it. And Biden has canceled student debt for like 4 million people and 18 million more once the rules come out, right? On Wyden like went out of his way to endorse that bill, the canceling medical debt bill. And that is totally different, right? Like I had to change my vibes analysis. I'm like, oh, cool. Finance is way cooler than I thought. And so
secondary vibe check.
Yeah. and that is really hopeful. And it's all based, again, the like dark center of it is it's based on the bleakness of where industry has gotten us, right? That there is no path out of where we are through this neoliberal, like, well, let's just ask the CEOs how to get out of this, right? And everyone's like, no, those dudes suck. And I'll sort of end with Bernie Sanders also pulling people in front of his committee and grilling them has yielded really pragmatic solidarity, which is, to me, the driving thing, that delivering wins for people, improving their lives. Literally like browbeated, I don't know if that's how you say that word, browbeat, I think is it. The inhaler manufacturers to just be like, please just stop talking about us. We will voluntarily lower our prices. And I say, as a policy guy, like, no, we're going to keep pushing the policy. I don't trust promises from sociopaths. But those prices, that's real, so people are willing to see an alternative, and they can't see a future that's less bleak on the current path. And that change, which I will say is like the false promise of neoliberalism, is hitting everyone in the face right now, and no one can deny it, right? And so we still have these enormous buckets of money against us, but there is a change, and it's real, and it's on the Hill, but it is driven by the organized people around the country.
Right. So to get us towards wrapping this up in a neat little bow with some takeaways, I've been thinking, as you guys have been talking throughout this presentation, it's like I think some of the depression and some of the like gloominess we have around this election cycle has to do with the assumption that in order to win Medicare for all, we need Medicare for all champions to be like, winning the presidency or winning all these congressional seats. But I do think the history of successful social movements doesn't necessarily bear that out, that often we are dragging reluctant politicians kicking and screaming into the right position. And we're not just replacing all of them. I mean, I would love to replace all of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can't make real significant wins. So how do you guys looking for, what are your kind of like top line takeaways in terms of Medicare for all activists, especially sort of beyond this election cycle?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is really having folks engaged with their members of Congress. I think people underestimate just how important it is to engage with your member of Congress. Even if they're not great on the issue, because their staff need to understand your experience in healthcare, but then also sort of thinking about the pipeline. Who's going to end up in Congress? Who's going to end up in the Senate? Who might run for president one day? That city council member that's just getting started, they're 28, they're full of good ideas, they're full of excitement, and you're telling them your healthcare story. They're going to have a hard time saying, no, it's good that your healthcare got denied. You deserved not to get your cancer drugs. They're going to be on your side. They're just sort of getting engaged in politics, and people's complex and challenging and difficult healthcare stories help prime them for a career where they're actually on the right side of history when it comes to healthcare justice. So getting involved in local elections early, talking to people, telling them your stories, writing op-eds to your local paper, requesting meetings sort of across the board with your delegation, your congressional delegation, really sets you up to, know the players, be able to be engaged. Because I think one of the things that, I think it's important that you pointed out, Ben, is it may not be that we are in the perfect scenario with the perfect politicians, but we may have a moment where all of a sudden Medicare for all is much more plausible than it was before, or some version of it is much more plausible, and we need to be ready for it. So we can't just all of a sudden show up, be like, oh, that's a good moment, but we're not ready for it. So we need to be building as if we're going to pass it at any given juncture, after any given election. And so as long as we've got the pieces in place, we can say, okay, we can plug you into the Medicare for All caucus. That'll help you understand. You're newly elected. You're a freshman in the House of Representatives. Now you can sort of talk to like-minded folks and become more educated on this. And so having all sorts of folks, anyone watching this, really engage, write letters, op-eds. It's an important time at all times to be pushing for folks to understand Medicare for all, because there is a lot of complexity there. And as they start to understand Medicare for all, they'll be forced to understand some of the other policies. So things around Medicare Disadvantage, Medicare privatization, medical debt, all of these things are going to be important as they sort of get radicalized and start moving towards actually supporting Medicare for all in the short and long term.
That was like a really good organizing speech from a policy guy. Good work, Egan.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that other than I think it's just part and parcel with it, which the only non-strategic thing to do is to be like, I'm not going to get exactly what I want, so I'm not going to try to get anything. That is that's a loser's path. And I remember John Nichols gives this amazing speech about what is losing. And he talks about Eugene Debs losing, right? And he's like, Eugene Debs lost, and, democratic socialism lost. And then, Francis Perkins and the New Dealers put the entire platform that lost and a really normie Dem, right? Like an aristocratic man, was the dude who put it through. And FDR is seen as this amazing, story. And it's true. He didn't think up the New Deal, right? Like and this is to the, you never know who's going to end up where. But Google Francis Perkins, read about how these ideas actually became true, and you don't have to be in the fight all the time. I always say it's not a sprint. It's not a marathon. It's a relay race, and it's real. Like, life is gloomy right now. There's war and genocide, and that's real. So if you need to take a moment, but don't throw up your hands and think that all is lost just because we're not winning everything that we want. We have to be doing that work. putting in the work, digging the foundation so that when things happen, which oftentimes is fast, we're the ones who are ready to get in there. And we're like, oh, look, here's all the ideas. We've already done all of this work. So in summation, to add on to what Egan said, always the most radical act you can take is to get organized. Never let them convince you. And the people at the conference, I think, are already understand this. Get organized, plug into organization and institution that's bigger than yourself, so that if you do need that help, you can ask for it. But more importantly, it's to feel the power of organized people. And once you feel the power, you understand we will never lose unless we give up. And then bring all your friends in and get them organized. And, you know, like, I don't know if anyone has seen it, but there's a clip going around from the South Park movie, or yes. I don't know if it's, on American healthcare, right? Like, there's these pop culture moments that it's undeniable the evil that we're up against. And so the only question that I think people have is, what do I do about it? And that's why getting organized is so important. So it's like, understand that you're not alone, and also that you can never win if you stay alone. You have to stand shoulder to shoulder with the millions of Americans who are fed up with this neoliberal nightmare that has driven the discourse for 40 something years.
Yeah, absolutely. In the labor movement, we say one day longer, right? We can last one day longer than the people who are trying to crush us. And that's how we're going to win every time. Yeah, excellent.
It turns out organizing is the best advice for wrapping up every podcast episode and topic is we have to go out and organize. But so I want to just conclude by thanking the podcast team who are working on the podcast side of this. Our podcast manager is Angelique Davis. Our show notes writer was Jerry Katz, and our audio editor was Craig Stanton. If you happen to be watching this in the conference, guess what? There's a Medicare for All podcast. You're on it. Go to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe. And this show is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. So if you would like to support our work and keep the podcast going strong for years to come, you can donate at our website, healthcare-now.org. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Stay safe and stay dangerous.